Good morning, everybody, except for those on the East Coast. Good afternoon. And thanks for joining this call. We like to have a call at the end of the year or very early in the next year to sort of wrap up what Together for Choice has done over the past year and talk about what we are planning to do in the coming year. So I'm going to talk about our activities at the federal level. I'll then turn it over to Ashley to talk about all of her activities at the state level during 2021. We'll then address what we are thinking about for 2022. And then I think we'll have some time to open it up to all of you to either make suggestions on where you'd like us to focus or to take your questions and provide hopefully some answers to things that are on your mind. When we started the year 2021, we said that our focus was going to be primarily on three subjects: the settings rule, supporting ICFs, and Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And that is where most of our energies were spent during the year. On the settings rule, you might recall that at this time a year ago, we were looking at a new administration in Washington coming in, an administration that obviously was going to be more progressive than the prior administration. And we had some concerns about the progress we had been able to make under the settings rule at the federal level in the prior administration. We were concerned that the new administration might wish to roll back the guidance that we were able to achieve back in March of 2019 and go back to the prior guidance, perhaps. And so one of our focuses was to try to see if indeed that was going to happen and try to stop that from happening. Ashley can talk a little bit later about her work in Pennsylvania, but in connection with that work, we connected with Congressman Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania. There's inconsistency, we believe, as Ashley will talk about, between the settings rule at the federal level and what Pennsylvania is trying to accomplish in the state through its regulations. And we brought that to Rep. Fitzpatrick's attention. He suggested that he write CMS to try to get clarification on the settings rule. And so we helped him put together a letter with a list of questions to ask CMS. This was back in May. CMS responded in June. And it was a very good response from our perspective because it didn't break new ground, but it did make clear that CMS was not rolling back its March 2019 guidance. And it made very clear that aspects of Pennsylvania regulation go well beyond what CMS requires, which helps us with our dealings with the state of Pennsylvania, but also reassured us that we were not dealing with a new landscape, at least not yet, at the federal level. Most of our efforts, though, during the year were addressed to supporting intermediate care facilities, ICFs. And the reason for that is, as you know, there have been a number of very sizable, very important funding bills that Congress has considered throughout the year. The Biden administration's first effort was its own virus relief package back in March, the American Recovery Act. And in there, the act provides for a $10 percentage point FMAP increase for home and community-based settings. And it had no provision in there for increased Medicaid funding for ICFs, which put ICFs at a significant disadvantage. One thing that made that less concerning, although it was still very much a concern, is that FMAP bump for HCBS is only for 1 year. It's going to expire unless it gets extended this spring. So it wasn't by itself an existential threat to ICFs. Nonetheless, it was extremely unfair to include a provision in this bill that provided increased funding for HCBS to address pandemic-related costs and not do the same for ICFs. And we drafted language that we sent to Senator Schumer and to others to include in the act to help ICFs along the very same lines as it was helping HCBS. Unfortunately, those efforts were not successful and we were not included in the bill. But, you know, we're used to having to persist, and we did. The next major piece of legislation that we needed to deal with is the Build Back Better Act, which, you know, those efforts started last spring and they're still, as you know, ongoing today. Again, the first draft of that bill had significant increased funding for home and community-based settings. The original proposal was for a permanent 10 percentage point increase in FMAP, the federal share of Medicaid for HCBS. It had no provision whatsoever to increase funding for ICFs. This, again, was very concerning, and it was even more concerning than the Recovery Act because this is a permanent increase in federal funding for HCBS, which would greatly disadvantage ICFs because they were not similarly helped. One of the reasons for the FMAP increase for HCBS is because HCBS is facing a staffing crisis. They can't attract or retain enough quality direct care workers to provide the services needed by the people they serve. Well, the fact is ICFs face that very same crisis. And so our point was and continues to be, you can't help one set of folks with disabilities and not help the other. The problems are the same in both settings in terms of the staffing crisis. And in fact, if you help address the direct care workforce crisis in HCBS, but you don't do it in ICFs, you're going to make the staffing problem in ICFs even worse because anybody wishing to get into direct care will go to HCBS for the higher pay, the better benefits, and the better training that this increased funding will facilitate. And so you're going to make the crisis in ICFs worse. And in fact, what could well happen is if ICFs can't get sufficient staff, some of them will close. And some of the 65,000 men and women living in ICFs will be forced from their chosen homes. That's unacceptable. And so that's the point we've been pushing for the last 9 months. And we've provided various drafts of statutory language to leadership in the House and leadership in the Senate to include in the Build Back Better Act. We've been helped immensely by David Axelrod, who's a member of TFC. And you may all recall that he wrote a very powerful op-ed in the New York Times over the July 4th weekend that got a lot of attention from members of Congress, from people in the White House, and that provided us with a bit of momentum, got us a bit of attention, and we've been trying to take advantage of that. Now, when as you know, the House has passed its version of the Build Back Better Act, it includes a tiny amount of funding for ICFs. And I've outlined that in the letter that I've asked all of you to send to members of Congress. So hopefully you've seen that. It is not nearly enough to allow ICFs to address their staffing crisis. It is not nearly enough to put ICFs on a comparable footing to HCBS. So again, it will not avert the crisis that we talk about. That is basically allowing HCBS to attract the quality direct care workforce to its settings and making the ICF workforce crisis worse. So we are continuing our efforts. The bill now sits in the Senate. We are asking the Senate to amend the Build Back Better Act to enhance the funding for ICFs. And we are, again, contacting, with tremendous assistance from David Axelrod, the leadership of the Senate, the higher ups in the White House, and we're continuing to work with the leadership in the House as well, because if the bill gets amended in the Senate, it has to go back to the House. The House then has to approve it. So they have to sign on to these changes as well. I hope all of you have seen the action alert that we sent out earlier this week, asking you to write to Speaker Pelosi, to Chairman Neal, and to Chairman Pallone, asking that the House work with the Senate to increase the funding for ICFs. I can tell you that I know a number of you have already written your letters, and it's made a difference, because we got an email from one of the staffers in the House, I won't mention his name, it says, please stop. I'm getting all these emails and you're accusing me of shutting down ICFs. That's not what we're doing. We're having an impact and we're not going to stop. Please, if you've sent your letters, great. Thank you very much. You're having an impact. If you haven't sent your letter, please, please, please do so. Now, remember, there are two letters. I asked you about 2 weeks ago to send letters to Senator Schumer, Senator Casey, and Senator Wyden. If you have not sent those, it's not too late. Please do it. In addition, we asked you just earlier this week to send letters to Speaker Pelosi and to Chairman Neal and Chairman Pallone. If you haven't done it, please, please, please do so. And now this week is the week to do it, because this is when things are going to be happening in the Senate. We're making a difference. Whether we're going to be successful, I can't tell you, but people are hearing us, which is what we need. So that's what's happening on supporting ICFs. 14C, one of the concerns, again, we had going into the year is with the new administration, new Congress, that there be renewed efforts to repeal 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which allows special wages for folks with disabilities based on their productivity. And you may recall that as part of the American Recovery Act early in the year, the Senate did try to raise the minimum wage for everybody across the country and to repeal 14C. The Senate parliamentarian ruled that that provision was inappropriate for a reconciliation bill. This is all very complicated, and unless people desire it, I'm not going to go into detail. But the main point is the Senate was not able to include it in the American Recovery Act. And so we were fortunate that that provision did not get included and did not get passed. And it seemed pretty clear that if repeal of 14C had to be passed through regular order in the Senate, it would require 60 votes, which would require 10 Republicans to join all Democrats in the repeal. And we were pretty comfortable that there were not the votes to make that happen. And we're still comfortable with that. However, there is a provision in the Build Back Better Act, which is very troubling. And we're dealing with a bill that's over 2,000 pages long. And amongst this bill is a tiny little provision that got snuck in there by Bobby Scott, the congressman from Virginia, the head of the Education and Labor Committee, that doesn't on its face repeal 14C. But what it does do is it provides grant money, about $270 million, to states who wish to get rid of their 14C program. So for a state to be eligible to receive any of this grant money, it's going to have to agree to get rid of all sheltered workshops and 14C jobs in that state. Now, I would expect that there will be a number of states that will not apply for this money because they don't want to pursue that policy. But there will also be a number of states that probably will. I would think some of the Democratic states, if they have not already done so at the state level, this might induce them to grab some of that money and get rid of the 14C and sheltered workshops in their state. We have contacted folks in the House and folks in the Senate with our concerns about this provision. And unfortunately, I have to say, we are not getting a lot of traction. This does not seem to be an issue that members of Congress wish to touch. And so the way they seem to be looking at it is, look, this is not a repeal of 14C. It's left up to the states. If states want to receive these grants, they'll do so. We need to talk to your states if you've got a concern about this. So that's where that stands. I think that this provision has greater likelihood of passing the review of the Senate parliamentarian because it is a grant program and doesn't explicitly repeal 14C. So there's a much stronger argument for those who want this provision in there that it's an appropriate provision. It has budget impact, and so it can be included in the reconciliation bill. We'll continue to follow it. We'll continue to advocate for amending it or deleting it, but I am not hopeful that we'll be successful. And for those that are interested, if you want to look at the provision, it's section 22201 of HR 5376. That's the summary of what we've done at the federal level. As a lot of you know, we have had a number of webinars throughout the year. Some of them were with federal officials. We had Melissa Harris, I think, a couple of times come on and talk to our members and answer questions about the settings rule. We had Laura Bracken talk to us about her work in connection with the settings rule. And we had a number of residential programs across the country describe for our members their innovative programs. So I hope you all found those webinars of interest. But at this point, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Ashley Kim Weiss, I'm sorry. She's our national coordinator. She's our only employee. She's supposed to work only 20 hours a week, but she works 2 or 3 times that amount. She's really the heart and soul of this organization. I just do what she tells me to do.
That's true.
And so I'd like her to come on and describe all the things that she's been doing at the state level throughout 2021. Ashley?
Great, thank you, Scott. By the way, that's not true. I do what Scott tells me to do. It's always the other way around. But thank you so much for giving me so much more credit than I deserve. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to share what I've been working on at the state level. As many of you are aware, after CMS came out with its 2019 guidance, basically, the attention pretty much shifted to states in terms of how they would interpret and implement the settings rule given the new 2019 guidance. And it's been a very mixed experience for many of us across the country. Some states have really embraced the flexibility that CM has provided. Others completely ignored that and really felt like there wasn't any change in the way the settings rule was supposed to be implemented. So one of the examples that I have that I would like to share with you is Pennsylvania, because many of you already know that Pennsylvania has been a big problem for many of our members. As you may be familiar with, the way things are in Pennsylvania is that it's one of the most restrictive, it has one of the most restrictive interpretation and implementation of the settings rule. And the state actually went as far as passing a state regulation that restricts how many people can participate in a program, how many people can live next to each other, how many services, or actually they do not allow any services to be adjacent to each other. So basically, it's just impossible for any intentional community or campus setting communities to exist that would rely on waiver funding. And as a result of that, now the unintended consequences of that restriction is happening all over Pennsylvania. Many families are struggling to find right placement for their loved ones, especially the ones with severe autism, with challenging behaviors. And so as a result of one family experiencing that, the difficulties of finding appropriate placement, we actually got involved in that process. And sorry, I'm trying to admit people back into the meeting as I'm talking right now. As a result of that, we've been able to really directly connect with ODP, which is the agency in Pennsylvania that handles development services. And because of throughout that process, we have been able to meet with state legislators and actually have a meeting with them in Harrisburg to discuss Pennsylvania's restrictions that go above and beyond the federal settings rule. And we are in the process of asking the legislators to consider a legislative amendment that would force ODP to basically remove all the restrictions that it has right now. Things are going very slowly right now because of the pandemic. And also, it's really hard for legislators to really understand these issues. And after all, they don't really have that much power over ODP. And you might experience that in your own state as well when you're meeting with your own state legislators. But at the same time, it's been very difficult to mobilize our network in Pennsylvania. And that's something that I would like to ask our members to consider in your own state. If you would like to see change happen, you have to get up and speak up and advocate for your loved ones. And we have to do it together. A lot of people ask me, like, why don't you come to our state and do this for us and other states? But at the end of the day, the change has to start with you. And the initial step has to be taken by you. And what we can do is just help you and support you in your advocacy effort. So that being said, Scott was great and in drafting a letter for us that we are presenting to the state legislators in Pennsylvania that could send a letter to ODP asking why the state is having these restrictions that go above and beyond the settings rule. We would like our Pennsylvania members to put pressure on your legislators to sign off on that letter so that we can send it to ODP sooner than later. And so that's one of those examples that we are, working with our state members to really push ODP to remove its restrictions and so that we can expand options for individuals living in Pennsylvania. In New York, it's been a while for us to kind of figure out how do we approach OPWDD. It's not that easy for us to just call these state agencies and say, I would like to talk to you about your practice. We have to have a specific reason why we want to talk to them. And so we've been waiting for that kind of opportunity for a while. That being said, and I don't want to say opportunity because that's just like, it's never a good thing for us to get involved in these issues, but we have to get involved. So some of you who are in this meeting that are from New York may be familiar that New York, you may be hearing about a lot of home closures. So OPWDD operates about 20% of group homes in the state of New York. And in the recent months, we've been hearing a lot from families that the group homes in which their child reside are closing down abruptly, and they're being forced to move to a new location. Actually, at one point, OPWDD had a plan to set up many cots in a gymnasium to move their residents out of their group homes and put them in a gymnasium until they can find some kind of alternative option. So apparently there's a thing called Appendix K that was passed or approved by CMS that allows many of these state agencies to take some kind of emergency temporary measures during this pandemic. And in some ways, we think that the states are given a little too much flexibility and too much immunity. And therefore, they are basically violating all the rights that are given to these individuals with developmental disabilities that they're supposed to serve. So that being said, I started reaching out to CMS, and then CMS reached out to OPWDD asking what's going on. And now OPWDD is trying to explain its position of why they're doing this. So I've been working with a number of family advocates in the state of New York, and we have a call scheduled with the Deputy Commissioner of OPWDD next week. So we think this is a good way to approach OPWDD and trying to hold them accountable for their action, but also to address a lot of other issues that are, much bigger than their short-term issues that we're currently facing. And so if you are experiencing something in your own state, please reach out to us. This is a way for us. This is how we start getting involved in different states. So something very specific example, like this can give us an opportunity to really reach out to CMS and reach out to your state agency and start the conversation. And that's how we can really try to influence what's going on there. And so a few things that I wanted to mention that I think, because we've been so focused on the DSP crisis and housing shortages and all these issues across the state, the country, there are a few things that happened earlier this year in the state of Washington and also California. Both states passed a law to end sub-minimum wage, and they're in the process of transitioning many individuals out of shelter workshops or facility-based workshops in the next couple of years. And this is a really serious crisis that we're facing because, as many of you know, many of these individuals who end up getting placed out of shelter workshops, it's just almost impossible for them to find some kind of community integrated jobs. So we're at this point, I was feeling very depleted, each time these laws were passed. And I would like to encourage you, if your state is looking into this option, please be proactive and please get involved, stay involved and engage with your legislators, engage with your state, people to make sure that this doesn't happen in your state, because it's going to just pop up out of nowhere and they're going to pass it. And when that happens, it's already too late. So it's really important, even if there's no conversation right now, to engage with your legislators sooner than later and make sure that they're fully aware of the situation and they understand your story and the importance of why these workshops are important for your loved ones. And they have to be educated. They have to be familiar with the issue so that when this issue comes up and the bill gets in front of them, they'll remember your story.